met a lot of business people who's very savvy with technology, okay, and whoever is trying to enter that organization, they have to realize that they're very knowledgeable business leaders. At the same time, I've been part of organizations where technology people were so valuable, is so knowledgeable on business side of the house, right, that it's basically becoming the team, and if you're making those decisions in silos, that's going to hurt right, everyone on the
100%.
long term. I mean, what are your observations in terms of that decision making?
Yeah, look, I think leaders are cynical. I think we understand on the business side that we've been asked to make a lot of really big investments the last 10 years. And right now, the last 24 months, we've had to make tough decisions as leaders, right? Like, do you spend, a large amount of money on an AI platform, or do you buy 20 more trucks? And so the decisions at the moment are very real to leaders. And I think with that, the leaders really have to spend the time to be able to articulate, like, what's the time frame? How does this enable the business to grow? And what are the right ways of approaching it? So I think I've seen a shift in decision-making approaches. So 2 years ago, we would talk a lot about platforms for growth. We'd talk a lot about here's the structure, the foundation. Today, I think we talk much more like, hey, here are the 3 core initiatives. Here are those 3 initiatives, and the business technology teams have to come together and kind of agree upon, where that resourcing is going. And I think that's a good thing. But it does, to your point, it forces those 2 organizations to come together a lot quicker. And, sometimes I'm talking to organizations with, 30, 40,000 people. And so it takes a lot of work to get those alignments to come together. But I do think that I think the organizations, the both sides, business, finance, technology, all the different parts are getting much more savvy in AI and ML. I think there's a general desire to use this technology to solve problems, which I think is a real gift for people like you and I, where we kind of can bring some of our experience in like the technical world and the business world together. And what I'm really hoping will evolve is I think we're going to have a much more rigorous approval framework and almost like outcome framework defined up front, so we can have much more controlled outcomes. And so remember, we used to sell platforms and we'd sell these big visions for multiple use cases. Now I think we talk about repeatable architectures with very specific outcomes. And that subtle shift is allowing businesses and IT and technology groups to get aligned faster, but also hold each other accountable to key requirements. And I think that is another key, I guess, innovation that we've seen for change management and how organizations work together, is really getting the teams aligned on key milestones and outcomes. Because, if you don't have the business bought in, it's not going to work. If the technology team can't deliver on time, it's not going to work. And as a technologist, you need to understand how the business is working. And if they're disengaged, it's just not going to work. They're just not going to adopt the technology.
Again, the moment we start talking about technology, AI adoption, any kind of new tool, new transformation initiative, all right, we quickly jump to organizational culture. Just we mentioned those, right, already, right? We quickly jump to actually technology agnostic business cases, okay, where we'll see the outcome faster, low-hanging fruit. We use all the different terms, right, to define it. So what about data quality? Because that's another big one that comes along, all right, because you can have your strategy, you can have your best people, right, but if you don't have pre-processed data quality, and again, the sources of data that right, you're going to be reliable, that you can trust. So how do you advise companies go about that? Because again, everyone accumulated that data. Not everyone knows what to do with it.
Yeah. I mean, like all data is probably wrong to start with, and so you've got to kind of go in and assume that that you've got to have to do some data hygiene. But remember that really good data is just determined to be good data by some collective. And so generally for us personally, when we deliver models, we generally go and regenerate, or we'll effectively extract existing data to organize it into a format that we prefer. And that's very unique to how Kinetic operates. We take a very probabilistic view on the data. And so it is a different approach, but we do that because we kind of assume that the statistical representation of the data is just as accurate as a deterministic representation of the data, minus some degrees of freedom. But what I would advise organizations more broadly is absolutely understand the core data that's required to answer the question you're asking. And this is where I think sometimes we get a little carried away as data engineers, as data analysts, is we see this beautiful data warehouse architecture and we see all the data we could have. And like, wouldn't it be great if we had like a customer 360 and we had also an understanding of our supply chain and put it all in one place? And that is definitely that is the nirvana we should all aim for. But sometimes when we start these projects, it's just better to be like, hey, we only need to know customer transactions and supply chain, latency to be able to map supply chain forecasting and make adaptations, and start there rather than trying to build this all-encompassing broad data architecture. And so generally my advice to start with when customers are taking on these complicated data projects is like, hey, yes, you do need to build to this perfect data set. You need to have like a blessed, ordained gold data class that you have in your organization. And if you don't have that, we know you're going to work towards it. But generally, to sort of start the machinery of applied AI and to get these use cases into production, generally I advise like, hey, just start with the data you need, and let's just start with the 3 or 4 data sets, and let's build onto that, and then build on top of that, and build on top of that. And I think that sometimes sounds very pragmatic, like, oh, Nick, but we've got all this great data. I'm like, yes, you've got the great data, but start with proving that with just the core data it works, and then we can get more sophisticated over time. And I think that is where a lot of data science projects get caught up, is because even BI projects get caught up because you try and bring everything you want to have the fullest picture. Like as like analysts, that's what we want to do. But first you want signal, and then with signal you can add color to the signal or temperature to the signal. And so that's generally how we're advising folks around how to manage their data architectures. The other thing, which again can sometimes be a bit boring, which is having really good data policy and governance strategy across the organization. And so before you even write your first row of SQL, getting alignment on like your governance framework and your policies and guidelines. And we talk about AI ethics and like AI grading and scoring components of different models. Getting that right up front is actually really key to supporting the development of a good data platform. And so those are the things that we generally advise. And that tends to guarantee a higher likelihood of success for some of these projects. And it also builds confidence in the organization. And I think, combining those 3 or 4 things together can be very powerful.